So Charles, let's just start. Give me your long history and background with Time Magazine.
Well, I started out in the business section as a reporter, and I worked up to being editor over the course of about 10 years and did things like edit our Wall Street crash cover in 1987. But then suddenly in late 1988, the editor, Henry Muller, decided he wanted to switch me over to the science section, be science editor, because he wanted to not have a man or woman of the year and make Endangered Earth Planet of the Year. And so I did this big cover story about global warming and ozone depletion and all the other bad things that were happening to the environment, and I just stuck with it for years after that, editing one environmental cover story after another. While I was doing all this environmental coverage, the Koch brothers were subtly financing a campaign of disinformation to convince the public and politicians that global warming was no big problem. So I retired from Time some years ago, but the strong environmental coverage kept up for a while, but now it's in grave danger, I would say. I have two children, and I now have a grandson, and this is about their future, and I recognize that right along. I am dismayed that over the years, climate change has become a partisan issue when really it affects everyone's future. Sometimes I wonder what goes on in the climate denialist mind. I think, don't they have children? Don't they have grandchildren? But of course, it's all about business, and an effective program against climate change is going to require some greater regulation and government intervention in the economy. At least that's what the conservatives think. So they'd rather stick their head in the sand and pretend that climate change doesn't exist and try to convince everyone else of that.
Well, I guess I'm curious, Charles. I mean, if you and we'll get to the implications of the Koch brothers buying or at least being part of buying Time Inc. in a bit, but I'm curious, as someone who was working on a cover story about the climate change now 25, 30 years ago, I guess.
Right.
Where was the science at that time? Where were you in terms of your understanding of the science? What was it that you found most compelling at that time, right? I mean, because we obviously have 30 years more worth of data now, which has been far more determinative, I think, that we have a problem. I mean, what was it at that time that you found compelling enough to justify a climate change cover 30 years ago?
That's a very good question. I guess I could have gone out on a limb and been wrong. I mean, Newsweek had this famous cover, I think it was in the 70s or something, about global cooling. Well, we had this, we invited a bunch of experts to a conference in Boulder, Colorado. And for 3 days, we listened to these scientists, and one scientist after another, they just convinced us. Of course, I was kind of getting into this fresh, but some of our Time science correspondents had been studying the issues for years. We Time had done a cover story on global warming the year before I got involved. The thing is that the basic science of global warming has never really been in dispute among scientists and has been known really for decades. Even I've forgotten exactly when the principle was discovered, but it's the greenhouse effect.
Right.
It's been known that if you have more carbon dioxide in the air, it's going to sort of act like a greenhouse, and it's going to let light in and also hold heat in like a greenhouse, and is going to warm up the planet. Now, what was not known was how long this was going to take, how fast it would go. And we still don't have an exact notion of that. We don't know exactly. But scientists just agreed that it was inevitable that the Earth was going to heat up. Now, you would have fits and starts. Mount Pinatubo erupted and put a bunch of aerosols in the air, and that caused a cooling period. So you can have different events. It doesn't go into a straight line upward. But we knew it had to have eventually. And when I thought about it, to me it was pointless to argue about how fast it was going to do. I didn't really care whether it was going to greatly affect my children or my grandchildren or my great-grandchildren. I just knew that it was going to get worse and worse, and that's exactly what we've seen. The evidence has gotten stronger and stronger and stronger. Maybe we did go out a little bit on the limb in the beginning, but we knew it was going to hit eventually, and so we just wanted to issue a very strong journalistic warning, which we did, and the evidence has gotten stronger and stronger. And unfortunately, conservatives think there's some
Charles,
sort
if
of
I could just stop you for a moment. We need to take a break here for a commercial.
Okay.
But when we come back, let's talk more about this and the implications of the Koch brothers being part of a party that has purchased Time Inc. and will have control over Time Magazine as well as other media properties. We got to take a quick break. I'll be right back after this. I'm Sam Seder. This is Ring of Fire Radio. We'll be right back with Charles Alexander in a moment.